Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 20th of September 2023. There is an awful lot of news to get through today due to lots of things happening, obviously the UN, lots of things geopolitically that I want to touch on. I'm going to move my frontline update segment to just my separate frontline update video, so just to let you know, gives me a bit more space to discuss what's going on. I think it's just because of Zelensky being in the US and military aid coming and things to talk about there. Anyway, let's go to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can see those caveats in the description below. 520 personnel lost yesterday for the Russians, 7 tanks, 17 armored personnel vehicles. That's a really heavy loss for those vehicles. We're going to talk a little bit about vehicles, or at least I'm going to reference Andrew Perpetua's live stream last night and excerpt it where he talks to Konstantin about the loss of vehicles specifically. 7 tanks is still, not a great day for the Russians, even though we have had days of higher losses. 34 artillery systems is ridiculously high. And again, the excerpt touches on the idea that we are not seeing most of the footage that exists in terms of the loss of vehicles and artillery systems, so on and so forth. I talk about their only being a fraction of video imagery available on social media. There are a couple of reasons for that. I mean, primarily is they just don't upload everything. There is just so much, but also the way first-person view drones work as well and how they record their footage. So that's an interesting snippet. Right, 1 MLRS system, multiple launch rocket system, 37 drones. That won't be from last night, the night before. 32 vehicles and fuel tanks is again a really high number. And there was talk in that live stream last night about how so many loafs, so many Bukankas, these Scooby-Doo vans are just being taken out. And 3 pieces of special equipment. So another difficult day for the Russians. There was also talk about how the Russians they have a lot of howitzers in storage. There is a tweet thread I want to find actually that talks about how they are having to take barrels off a lot of the kit that's in storage, and that's how they're replacing barrels. The Russians, as has been predicted previously, will have or are having problems with barrel maintenance and wear down. It's something the Ukrainians do as well when they take their SPGs. I think it works the other way. That's what Konstantin was saying, that with the Russians taking barrels off D20s and D30s, Ukrainians have had some old self-propelled guns that have been in storage for so long that the transmissions aren't working. The actual main frame isn't working, so they will lop the barrel off those and put it onto other things. So barrels are of high value. Okay, we're going to move on to look at Oryx, the aggregator of visually confirmed losses. At 16 Russian losses compared to 2 Ukrainian losses, and we'll talk about that damaged fighter, but the other one's just a drone. So really, I'd say that's mainly the damaged fighter. So you could almost say 16-1 there. So have the Russians lost most of here? Well, quite a few tanks. Andrew Perpetua again was saying just there are so many Russian tanks that have been taken out of late. And also, we're not seeing so many train loads of replacement vehicles coming in. What was an interesting nugget is that he reckons about 60% of Russian vehicles are in Ukraine. About 40% are kept outside of Ukraine in Russia, but close to Ukraine. When they get an attrition of vehicles, they bring them in from, say, Rostov-on-Don area or whatever. They bring these in on train and then unload them and replace the ones that have been lost. But he's saying that there are fewer of those trains coming in, which kind of indicates that they are running lower. And he thinks they've got 6 months left of vehicles, and then the war will completely change. To think where they started, the Russians, in terms of their mechanized equipment and where they are now, it's a big difference. Anyway, the rest of this is kind of artillery and trucks. As I say, Ukrainians just had this MiG-29. We're going to look at that in a second. But I just want to go to Andrew Perpetua's live stream to just have this conversation about vehicles and about drones and drone footage?
The issue that I see for Russia is that I think that they are running out of vehicles. I'm not saying they have zero vehicles. I just think that they're running out of vehicles. And
Not loaves, definitely.
no, they have tons of loaves. Hi, Constantine.
Hello.
Um, but I think Russia running out of vehicles. I think once they hit a certain wall, which I think might take like another 6 months to get there. I think once they hit that wall, I think the war is going to change a lot. What do you think, Constantine? Do you think the war will change if Russia runs out of vehicles, or at least if
But
they
it
hit
was
it? Do you think their behavior will change? How Russia fights?
I think their behavior is changing right now already. We can see it. Like if we watch the videos right now, and from what I hear, like finding Russian equipment is more and more complex. It's more scarce for them. So I do think that, and we see more and more love strikes, and we only
Konstantin is a former fighter in Ukraine. He's not in Ukraine at the moment, but he's got a lot of contacts. He does a lot of fundraising, and he also uploads a lot of footage himself. So has a good idea of the amount of footage that there is available on for strikes.
see half. Like for example, I see more and more love strikes, and we only see half. Like for example, I have probably 10-15 videos that I did not upload that I have, and I did
I
not
don't.
upload them.
I don't think we even see half. To be honest, like I feel like whenever whenever you talk to someone that you haven't talked to before in a while, you know what I mean? Like maybe in like 3 months, I bet you they can hand you a bunch of videos you've never seen before, right? And you could probably do that with every single person you know, probably, right?
Yes, especially with FPVs. This is an issue because with FPVs, mm, with Mavics, for example, the surveillance drone, you actually like you film, you record, you bring back the Mavic, you pull out the card, the flash card with the memory, with the storage, and you can store this video. But with FPV drones, because they're usually suicide ones, it's only one way. If someone records it, like literally the stream, the live stream, then you can have it. But yeah, records on the remote. But usually not many people do. That's why you see FPV videos. They're really low quality. Usually like screen recorded quite often. That's because like you don't get the flash card from one way kamikaze drone. So I'm also thinking that loads like, I don't know, 50, 40, 60% of the FPV videos or even more are not being, made public ever because they're simply lost. And that's I think the reality that we have right now.
Yeah.
And that's really important to understand why we don't see all the footage, why there are these massive claims of, you know, of lots and lots of equipment being destroyed on a daily basis, but you're only seeing a small proportion of the video footage coming out about that. And you're thinking, well, they're just talking rubbish. Well, it's not that they're talking rubbish. They are supposedly attriting the Russians to those levels and then releasing what they release. But there's an awful lot, Konstantin, what, 60% of FPV drone footage lost forever because it requires someone to screen record it on whatever device they're using. So if they're using a little handheld, handheld controller, is that going to be able to screen record what they're seeing, and then some of it will be recording the screen from a third party and piece of equipment like a phone, recording that screen a bit like the Stugners or whatever. There's lots of reasons why you're not going to see all the FPV drone footage that would otherwise be available, and it's FPV drones that are doing so much of the damage.
And a lot of I've noticed a lot of FPV drones are filmed by like Mavics.
Yeah, because Mavic, first of all, Mavic does the search. Because FPV has shitty camera, it does not have zoom. You cannot find equipment, so you gotta have one Mavic that will find the target for you, and direct. That's one of the things. And another thing is that the Mavic drone, it often carries the repeater, because on FPV drone, when it starts descending, as it gets closer to the ground, it loses connection with your remote control, because of the curvature of the earth, because of the obstacles between you and the drone. And Mavic at the same time, it has a small repeater attached to it, that transmits a signal from your remote to the Mavic, and from the Mavic to the FPV. This is how they usually work, like in conjunction. So you cannot have just FPV. It's quite hard to use. You gotta have some other good optics drone, and also a transmission if you're trying to fly somewhere further than a couple of kilometers.
So I thought that was a really interesting nugget looking at FPV drones and such footage. Right, the other thing to note of late is that there is an absolute ton of POW footage coming out of Ukrainians taking really quite a lot of prisoners of war. And I think other analysts have talked about this, how they're really, yes, it's anecdotal, and I have said this in the last few weeks, but I'll repeat it, that yes, anecdotal, but it's got to, I think, tell us something when there is just the myriad videos of prisoners being taken and taken away. Right, this is breaking news. Ukrainian GUR reports unknown saboteurs blew up 2 planes and a helicopter near Moscow. At the airfield, the Chkalovsk group of the investigative committee of the Russian Federation is investigating the sabotage, as a result of which 2 planes and 1 helicopter were significantly damaged on September the 18th, 2023. The event caused quite a bit of hysteria on the higher military corridors. Government planes, so-called doomsday planes, and special planes, reconnaissance planes, are based at the airfield. Unknown persons planted explosives and detonated AN-148 and IL-20 aircraft. Both belong to the 354th Special Purpose Aviation Regiment at the airfield, which is carefully guarded, as well as Mi-28N helicopter, which was actively involved in shooting down attack drones over Moscow region. Is the Mi-28N, is that the electronic warfare type as well? Aircraft damage will not allow us to count on their quick recovery. The tail part of the helicopter was damaged by the explosion. Another AN-148, which was next to the others in the parking lot, received minor damage. Punitive authorities of the Russian Federation are conducting measures to find the saboteurs and limit the dissemination of information about the event in local media. This is brilliant stuff. This is exactly what you want, and then it'll keep the Russians jittery. Good stuff. And we've just heard that a Su-34 fighter bomber has crashed in the Voronezh region. The crew ejected and survived. So there's now imagery of that on the ground as well that you can see there. It is not in a good way. So that's another fighter bomber that has fallen from the skies within Russian territory. Ukrainian armed forces have hit 5 of the 13 Russian landing ships in the Black Sea, according to Navy. This is just a kind of summary of where this is nothing particularly that's happened in the last 24 hours. Before the invasion, Russian Federation, under the pretext of exercises, brought an additional 6 ships into the Black Sea through the Bosphorus Strait, increasing their number to 13 over the past year and a half. The Ukrainian army has hit at least 5 large landing ships of the Russian Navy. The 8 indicated large landing ships, 2 are unsuitable for use and do not go to sea because they are very old. So the Ukrainian Navy are, and Zelensky's been mentioning the Navy. I was listening to Exit, who I'm hopefully going to interview at some point soon, who was on this live stream as well. She's got expertise in sort of maritime issues, saying that actually it's quite exciting at the moment. There's lots of talk about the Navy, the Ukrainian Navy being quite active. There's obviously the assaults and activity on the Tarkhan Kut Cape and Western Crimea, and the rigs out in the Black Sea, and then the grain corridor, and there are boats, I think, that are accompanying some of the grain ships that are leaving through the land, hugging the land all the way down to Bosphorus Strait. So, Zelensky mentions the Navy as well. So it's getting, they are, in the limelight at the moment. So here we have just 2 destroyed Russian S-400 launches. These are the highest value air defense systems they use, practically speaking. I mean, in principle, I think there's S-500, but I don't know that any exist on the field. One of which was already documented. The other is an undocumented loss. So I don't know when this is from, but it's just goes to show that the Russian air defenses are being attrited, and some of their very best air defenses are indeed being attrited. Okay, hope it's true. Fantastic target. There is lots of rumors coming out about this being a significant hit. It came out yesterday, but we're still to hear the finer details. A source from the Checker OGPU reported that today, the headquarters of the 7th Airborne Division, so these are paratroopers, top-notch elite troops, or at least in principle, near Kherson was attacked. Previously, many officers died from a targeted strike on the command post. So I think that means earlier, in this event. The exact number of victims is carefully hidden. At the time of the shelling, the paratroopers were undergoing daily planning. The fact of the arrival of the Checker OGPU was also confirmed by the chairman of the Organization of Veterans of the 7th Guards, Yevgeny Kanin. So apparently this was a significant hit and could have resulted in some serious losses for the Russians in the Kherson region. We haven't seen this for some time. There was a sort of purple patch of a number. I think it was when Storm Shadows came on the scene. A number of these places, and with HIMARS as well, being hit and taking out high value troop accumulation and officer accumulation targets. We haven't heard of this for some time, but anyway, that's possibly really good news. Now, there have been some Russian sources that claiming these are Russian attacks on Ukrainian Ukrainian positions, but geolocated is complete nonsense. It's a Ukrainian attack on Russian positions. This is just good footage to see. I sometimes worry or wonder about the efficacy of these kind of unguided rocket attacks from things like your old Soviet attack helicopters. But this is pretty good footage showing, I think this is possibly near Klishchivka, as it's firing off rockets and then fires off its flares and chaff and whatnot, so it doesn't get hit by other things. But by ATGMs or manpads or whatever. But you can see I think it's this last bit that interests me, is these rockets hitting, and actually, okay, they're scattered, and a lot of them hitting in the middle of the fields. So I'm not sure they're crazy effective, but they are. You have a few salvos of those going on, and you're going to get a headache if you're in those tree lines. Anyway, strikes on Russian boats somewhere in the Kherson region. There's been lots of this. Both sides have lost quite a few boats. So I know this is Ukrainian footage, but I'm sure the Ukrainians are losing their own as well. But there's quite a bit of FPV drone footage of boats getting taken out on the Dnipro. That's worth bearing in mind that there is attrition of boats too. Now, this was a big news from yesterday. I've left it to last on the hits and losses. This has been geoconfirmed. This did happen. This is a thing. What's significant about this is it took place in Kryvyi Rih, right? So Kryvyi Rih is here, which is, this is the air base here. You can see it. In fact, it's literally this parking space, if you like, that was here. Yeah, I think it was that one. So let's go and see how far that is away from the front lines. And you will see that it is. So from where the Russians might fire something, that is a good 80 kilometers distance. So you could say maybe 100-kilometer distance. Now, this appears to be a Lancet drone hitting 100 kilometers. Bearing in mind, it's got to go slightly further because it loops back round and comes in from the north. It's highly doubtful it was released from within Ukraine. Now, Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter aircraft was damaged by Russian Lancet loitering munition at the airfield of Kryvyi Rih. An overhead drone was filming it 65 kilometers from the front line. So it's not just that you've got the Lancet doing this damage, but you've got another drone filming it apparently freely in Kryvyi Rih. I mean, first of all, it's quite amazing that these planes are actually able to fly this close to the front line anyway, and they've been doing so somewhat unhindered. But so that's good for the Ukrainians, but this is a real worry for the Ukrainians here, because you've got a Lancet. Okay, it misses the plane, but it will have caused some damage. So that's an opportunity, I think, really missed for the Russians as it hits the ground just to the right. These are quite notoriously difficult drones to control, but that would have done damage to that. That won't be flying, I'm sure, in the next few days. That'll have to have probably some attention. But you've got two drones operating, that far behind the front lines. That is a massive worry. While this strike is unfortunate, says John Ridge, the fact that Ukraine has been able to operate fixed-wing assets from airfields less than 70 kilometers from the front line for months is genuinely hysterical. Yep, I mean, that's a positive, but the fact that Russia can have a loitering munition and another drone overlooking that loitering munition above a really high-valued, sensitive target, above an airbase, that far from the front lines, is an absolute travesty for the Ukrainians in my book. Right, we're going to go on to distance hits. I mean, that was a distance hits with more kind of actually shorter range drones, or what we would normally understand. So that's the other point, actually, that you've got a Lancet flying that distance means that, does it mean that Lancet capabilities have been improved? Okay, Ukraine claims it has been able to intercept 90% of Russian cruise missiles and drones and 80% of air and ground launched ballistic missiles. That is really significant, especially on the ballistic missiles. And of course, it depends where these are. So Kyiv appears to have almost, if not an actual 100% interception rate. Whereas elsewhere there are holes within the network of air defense, so there will be places that are far more susceptible. We've seen that Reni and Ismail down on the Danube have been targeted with some success recently, and I presume the Ukrainians have moved some air defense assets down there to try and combat that. It's been the most successful battlefield use of missile defense to date, says Tom Karaka of CSIS. So the Ukrainians have done a marvelous job, but they need more air defense assets. And this is what Lloyd Austin was saying when being pressured about ATACMS. He's still towing the line that it is more imperative that Ukraine get air defense systems than ATACMS. I don't know why there's a dichotomy there. To me, that's a false dichotomy. Like, well, how about air defense systems and ATACMS? I don't know why it has to be one or the other. But that's the narrative. Overnight launches of several groups of Russian drones, according to preliminary data, about 24 were recorded in the southeastern and northern directions, so two areas of Ukraine. 17 were shot down, so that does mean 7 have got through. That's a worry. I know people say, good job. 7 drones getting through is, I think, I would like to see higher interception rates, but it relies on, Ukraine's a big country. You send a drone into Ukraine from anywhere around here, right? Then you've got an awful lot of land you need to cover with something like a Gepard, unless you're going to take them out with really high value missile systems. But even then, you've got to have them stationed everywhere. So these drones can dogleg and drive in or fly in directions and areas where you're just not going to have coverage. So it is really difficult. Okay, Russia is using aviation really effectively still, and I don't report on it every day. I probably should, but it just to remind you. So 6 civilians killed in Kupiansk due to guide bombs. The bomb targeted a vehicle of volunteers who were evacuating civilians from the city, according to Serhiy Bolvinov, the head of the investigation department of the National Police of Ukraine. So that is Kupiansk up here, but actually right down the front line in different areas, I think Liman was hit recently. We've got, if you add this together with Iskanders and other ballistic S-300 ballistic missiles, then, you know, all of these places are getting consistently targeted. Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk was hit the other day. Then Vuhledar, I think, is being hit with aviation. Then you've got along the front line in Zaporizhia. Then you've got Dnipro as well. They are using aviation really effectively, and I think that's still a massive thorn in the side for the Ukrainians, because these guide bombs, these glided guide bombs, have extended range and a really decent. They pack a decent punch, and the Russians can release those far behind the line and in the safety of their own occupied territory, and the planes aren't particularly threatened at all. Train strike in Lviv, which took place 2 nights ago now, is it? Destroyed 300 tons of humanitarian aid, according to the UN. So there are different claims. The Russians, I think there's a train hit, and the Russians claiming that, you know, they've hit weapons, obviously, but literally UN have come out and said this is humanitarian aid. 300 tons of it all gone up. I mean, that's war crime. It just, yeah, typical of the Russians, if indeed that is true. Russia says it shot down an aircraft type drone in Belgorod. No further details. So that came out last night. So that was Ukrainians firing drones into Russian territory still. And in Feodosia, so this is their cargo port as opposed to military port. So you've got Sevastopol's their naval port, but they do a lot of cargo into Feodosia. That's going to be a key place to keep targeting, and we've seen it targeted an awful lot over the last few months. In Feodosia, occupied Crimea, there were reports of explosions. Also in Simferopol district, loud bangs were noticed, so the Ukrainians still hitting Crimea. In fact, there was video footage yesterday. The Russians claimed that they'd shot down all the Storm Shadow missiles, and then pretty much just after claiming that, someone uploaded video footage of Storm Shadow flying over the skies in Crimea, and they claimed they shot them down before they got to Crimea. In fact, I reported that yesterday. So, you know, another example of the Russians talking rubbish there. News coming in of a potentially huge hit on Ukraine. So this is what I mentioned in the last section, near Kherson. Even sources inside Russia suggesting the 7th Airborne Division HQ was struck today. Many officers are believed to have been killed. News is not verified. So that should have been in my previous one, because I think that was... Well, no, it might not have been. It might not have been artillery. It might have been Storm Shadows or HIMARS. Who knows? Right, Russia on fire. This is I believe, a diesel fuel depot that's been on fire. I mean, I think it's been on fire for a long time, because this has come out this morning, although it looks like evening. But yeah, there was footage of this yesterday as well. According to some Telegram channels, a loitering munition hit the diesel fuel tank near Sochi International Airport. I think there's evening footage of nighttime footage of a drone hitting that, I think. So that's important, because diesel, apparently there are complaints that diesel is expensive. That will obviously make it more so, or at least continued hits like that will. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. Quote, Ukraine has confirmed that it will demand reparations from the Russian Federation in The Hague. The amount is being determined. So that is, I think there's going to be a lot of activity in The Hague going forward, and Ukraine and Russia are going to feature quite a bit. Right, I'm not going to show this, but it is bizarre. This is just another example of Russians being brutal. You've got a line of Russian soldiers here caught on drone being pummeled in the lower back or on the back with a massive long stick, and it appears that they are just getting punished by their own commanding officer, just in a really brutal way. Quite why, I don't know, but we see stuff like that. Just it's somewhat indicative. Right, I almost reported on this yesterday. I wanted to see how it all panned out, because I wasn't sure. There were initial reports that the New York Times were kind of just repeating Russian talking points. But anyway, the NYT came out yesterday with a piece saying, do you remember this market was hit in Konstantinivka? I just mentioned Konstantinivka, and it was supposedly hit with an S-300. Well, they've done an investigation that seems to point towards it actually being a Buk surface-to-air missile coming from the Ukrainian territories. So I'm going to report this, of course, We need to be accurate in how we understand. The analysis was mainly on the direction it's coming from and where people were turning their heads before it came. Like there, you can see they're turning their heads. That you know the direction of this street, and you see it reflected on car roofs. Now, Ryan Macbeth did a video on this when this kind of evidence first came out to debunk some of those claims. But I have a feeling the New York Times article actually kind of overcomes his complaints, but or trumps his complaints. But anyway, that you can go and read that. Some people or many people claim it doesn't make any difference, right? If Russia weren't sending missiles in that needed to be taken out of the air by air defense missiles, then mistakes like this wouldn't happen. This is the nature of war. Stuff like this will happen, but it's only happening because Russia have invaded. So it's ultimately Russia's responsibility. You see what I mean? They have ultimate culpability. I don't want to get into very similar to debates about God's culpability if you're debating whether God exists or not, and you know that I'm a philosopher of religion, and that's, you know, ultimate culpability. It happened. Who's ultimately responsible? So anyway, Russia, I would argue, are ultimately responsible there as well. I would go along with that. So New York Times reports that, and then the Ukrainians come out and confirmed that it was an S-300 that hit and killed 15 in the marketplace. Of course, they're going to say that. What the truth is, I don't know. And as I say, some of you will say, well, the truth, actually doesn't matter there because it's all about ultimate culpability. I reported some time back a Russian colonel was arrested earlier this year for stealing T-90 engines. Well, it's worse than originally thought. It's apparently linked to the theft of 21 tank engines worth tens of millions of rubles. Now, if that is the case, then that's 21 Russian tanks that can't be built. So this kind of stuff has a real world effect on the war. So I'm not going to read through that, but that kind of corruption. When you hear about people being arrested in Russia for corruption, I almost feel a sense of, oh, that's a shame. Because you almost want them to continue to be corrupt within Russia, because that will affect the efficiency at which the Russian army is working. So if someone's happily there, uncaught, undetected, stealing Russian tank engines, then that's good for Ukraine. Whereas when they catch him and put him in prison, you think, that's a shame. He was doing a good job of screwing up the Russian army. Anyway, that's just my tuppence. Right, Ukraine may have carried out a special operation in Africa. This is according to CNN. Militias supported by the Wagner PMC were attacked by drones near the capital of Sudan. And although it is difficult to fully confirm Ukraine's involvement, a number of factors indicate this, according to CNN. I mean, that is fascinating that Ukraine are able to put a spanner in the works of Russia abroad as well. I don't know how accurate that is. The argument would be, is that those resources well spent? I don't know. That's an open question. Without the knowledge of what they're hitting and why they're hitting it, and the outcome of the operation, you can't really cast any opinion. So you wouldn't be justified in any conclusion. The lack of knowledge just means you've got to go, oh, interesting, and not judge either way. They know what they're doing, and if they think that that's worth them doing, if they have done this right, then they obviously think it's worth them doing that. You know, they're not stupid, and they have limited resources, so this will have some kind of important practical outcome. Anyway, there you go. That's today's first video. As I said, the second video is a lot to talk about. In that one, I'll probably cut out the frontline segment and just do that as a separate video. Anyway, thanks so much. Take care. Speak soon.